I want you to try and just visualize the sounds for a second.
Okay.
It's a really quiet, gray morning in rural Indiana. Maybe you're out on your back porch with a cup of coffee just waking up. And then you hear this rotor blade thumping in the distance.
Like a helicopter?
Yeah, exactly. You look up, and hovering right above the tree line is a helicopter. But this isn't a traffic chopper or a medevac unit.
Right.
Suspended about 100 feet beneath this aircraft, just dangling on this flexible tether, is a vertical metal column. And it has 10 spinning circular saw blades on it.
It seriously looks like something designed by a Bond villain.
It really does. I mean, it looks like it should be chasing James Bond down a ski slope in the Alps or something. But it's actually a tool for keeping the lights on in Indiana.
A very effective, albeit terrifying-looking tool.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are unpacking the March 2026 issue of REMC Connect, specifically looking at the Southeastern Indiana REMC.
Right.
And honestly, the source material this week completely threw me for a loop.
How so?
Well, I expected billing updates and, maybe a casserole recipe. Instead, I got aerial saws, global supply chain logistics, and this really profound philosophy lesson on community.
It is a surprisingly dense stack of papers this time around. And I think the theme that really jumps out is this tension, or maybe symbiosis is a better word, between extreme high-tech innovation and very traditional dirt under your fingernails community values.
Innovation meets tradition. That was the phrase, right?
Exactly. We're going to cover how a 10-bladed flying saw connects to a guy clearing weeds in a cemetery, and why your smart thermostat is actually part of this massive regional economic equation.
Let's start with the helicopter because I am still stuck on that image.
It's hard to shake.
Right. So this is the vegetation management department. And my first thought was just, is this really necessary?
It seems like overkill.
Yeah. It seems incredibly expensive to rent a helicopter just to trim trees. Why not just send a guy in a truck with a chainsaw?
That is the intuitive question.
Yeah.
But you have to look at the geography. Southeastern Indiana isn't just a flat tabletop.
Right, it's not all cornfield.
No, you have ravines, dense hardwood forests, limestone topography. Sending a ground crew in a bucket truck is sometimes impossible because the truck literally can't get there.
Ah, okay.
And if they have to hike in, climb the trees, and cut the branches manually, it's incredibly slow. And statistically, it's one of the most dangerous jobs in the world.
So the helicopter is actually, wait, is it safer?
Drastically. And much faster. That 10-bladed saw can clear a right-of-way in a fraction of the time it takes a human crew. The source material emphasizes that this efficiency is key to reliability.
Because of the power lines.
Exactly. If a branch touches a line or even just gets too close and causes an arc, the power goes out.
They did issue a pretty stern warning in the text, though. It said, maintain a safe distance.
Which makes perfect sense. You do not want to be anywhere near the debris field of a flying saw.
There was one detail that actually made me laugh out loud. Apparently, a really common complaint they get is that the helicopter leaves a massive mess.
You cut the branches, but you left them there.
Exactly. I can just imagine watching it fly away and thinking, hey, come back with a rake.
The co-op actually had to clarify that in the newsletter. The helicopter is basically the scalpel.
And the cleanup crew.
Is the sponge they come after. Yeah. It's a two-stage process. But I think it highlights just how visible this infrastructure work is. You really can't hide a helicopter.
Speaking of things you can't hide, let's talk about the grid event on January 24th.
Oh, yes.
The CEO, Keith Matthews, wrote a whole letter addressing it. Apparently, people were asked to lower their thermostats, and the public reaction was pretty spicy.
It usually is. The common sentiment is always, I pay my bill. Why are you asking me to freeze? Go shut down a factory.
And honestly, it feels like a valid critique on the surface. Why is the burden on the grandmother watching TV and not the massive data center down the road?
To understand that, we have to peel back a layer of the onion that most people never really see. The CEO makes this critical distinction between distribution and generation.
Break that down for us. What does that mean for the listener?
Okay, so SEI REMC, the local co-op, is basically like the delivery truck. They own the wires and the poles that bring the package to your house. But they don't make the package. They don't actually generate the electricity.
So where does it come from?
That comes from a regional organization called MISO.
MISO.
Right. Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. They control the flow of power across 15 states and even part of Canada. It's basically air traffic control for electricity.
Wow, 15 states.
Yeah. So when MISO says we are running out of power, it is a regional emergency. It's not just a local switch that someone flipped.
So when the local co-op asks me to turn down my heat, They're really just passing on a message from air traffic control.
Precisely. Now, to your earlier point about the factories, the source material clarifies something really interesting here. Large industrial users often are part of the solution.
Oh,
They have what are called interruptible contracts.
meaning they get cheaper electricity rates in exchange for agreeing to get cut off.
Correct. But shutting down a massive manufacturing plant isn't like flipping a light switch in your kitchen. It takes time.
Right, they have machinery.
Machinery, safety protocols, and it requires huge coordination at that higher MISO level.
Whereas my thermostat takes 2 seconds to adjust.
Exactly. This is the concept of aggregated demand. If 10,000 homes turn their heat down by just 2 degrees, the drop in load is instantaneous.
It buys them time.
It buys the grid operators the critical minutes they desperately need to stabilize the system. So it's not about letting the big guys off the hook, it's purely about physics and speed.
It's the power of the crowd, literally.
It is. And to prevent those tight situations, the magazine details some pretty heavy investments they're making for 2026.
I saw that list. We're talking pole replacements, line rebuilds, and something they call system automation with RF meter technology.
Right.
RF meter technology?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like absolute jargon bingo. What does that actually mean for the person sitting at home?
In plain English, it means the meter talks back. In the old days, the power company didn't actually know your lights were out until you picked up the phone and called them, or until your neighbor called them.
Right, the old look out the window and see if the streetlights are off method.
Exactly. With RF, which stands for radio frequency, with that automation, the grid is self-reporting. It creates a digital map of the outage instantly.
So the repair truck basically knows where to go before I even find my flashlight.
Ideally, yes. It changes the entire response from reactive to proactive.
Okay, sticking with the tech theme for a minute. We need to talk about fiber, because the numbers in this report are just staggering. 2,241 miles of fiber line.
For a rural cooperative, that is a massive infrastructure project. That's enough cable to stretch all the way from Indiana to California.
And over 8,000 fiber services connected. But what I found really interesting is how they frame it. They aren't selling it as, hey, watch Netflix faster.
No, they aren't.
The headline is, what powers tomorrow's connections? They keep calling it a backbone.
I love that framing because it shifts the entire conversation from entertainment to utility.
Yeah.
We so often think of internet speed in terms of, can I stream a 4K movie?
Right.
But the magazine points out that the modern home, the smart home, is becoming a really congested digital highway.
They mentioned a number that actually shocked me. They said it's common for a single home to have 20 connected devices. I started counting in my head and I got to like 6.
You would be surprised. Phone, laptop, tablet, that's 3 right there, just for one person.
Okay, true.
Then you add the smart TV, the video doorbell, the smart thermostat we just talked about,
The robot vacuum?
the Wi-Fi-enabled washing machine, the security cameras outside, the smart speaker in the kitchen.
Okay, I see how it adds up fast.
Yeah.
But do those things really use that much data? My thermostat isn't downloading high-def movies.
It's not about volume so much as it's about latency and concurrency.
Concurrency meaning everything happening at once.
Exactly. If you have security cameras constantly uploading video to the cloud and a kid gaming in the basement and you're upstairs on a Zoom call for work, you are creating a massive traffic jam.
And that's where the backbone comes in.
Fiber optics have huge bandwidth. It's the difference between a 1-lane dirt road and a 10-lane superhighway. If you don't have that infrastructure, all these so-called smart devices basically become dumb bricks because they can't talk to each other or the cloud fast enough.
So really, laying this fiber is almost the modern equivalent of the Rural Electrification Act back in the 1930s.
100%. It's the prerequisite for participating in the modern economy. Telehealth, remote work, online education.
Without it, a rural community just gets left behind.
Completely.
So we've got the high-tech side covered pretty well. We have helicopters, self-reporting grids, and fiber optic highways. But I want to pivot to the other half of this deep dive, the tradition side.
The human element.
Yes, specifically a man named Bobby Hacker.
This was the member spotlight section. And honestly, after reading page after page about gigabits and voltage and meso grids, this story was so incredibly grounding.
Tell us a bit about Bobby.
So Bobby is a furnace operator at NAS. He lives in Jefferson County. And he's just the classic good neighbor, the kind of guy who can fix anything and is always willing to help.
but the story focuses on a very specific project he took on.
Right, the cemetery.
Yeah.
So there was this old cemetery on land that his great-grandfather had donated way back in the day.
Right.
And over the decades, it had just been completely swallowed by nature. Weeds, thick brush, thorns everywhere. You couldn't even see the headstones anymore.
And to be clear, this wasn't his job. Nobody paid him to go do this.
No, he just saw that it was disrespectful. So he took his own tools and his own free time, and he just started clearing it out.
Wow.
He actually uncovered headstones dating all the way back to the 1800s.
There was this really beautiful image in the text where it mentions he goes back there every single Veterans Day to place flowers.
It shows such a deep respect for continuity, for history, and that specific character trait, that willingness to serve your community without being asked, is exactly why he's now on the board of trustees for Operation RoundUp.
We should probably explain Operation RoundUp because I think it's one of those things people see on their electric bill and just ignore. Or maybe they think it's just some corporate marketing gimmick.
Oh, it's definitely not a gimmick. The math behind it is fascinating.
Explain how it works.
It's a micro-donation model. When you sign up, you agree to simply round up your electric bill to the next full dollar.
Okay, so if my bill is $85.50, I pay $86.
Exactly, and that extra 50 cents goes into a community pot.
Which feels like absolutely nothing to the individual.
Right, it costs the average member maybe $6 a year, the price of one fancy coffee. But because it's a cooperative and you have thousands of people participating, the aggregate is huge.
So what does that add up to?
The source notes, they just awarded $46,100 to 22 local organizations in this last cycle alone.
Wait, 40 grand just from spare change?
Just from spare change rounded up on a bill. And people like Bobby are the ones who sit around a table and decide, okay, the local food pantry needs a new freezer, or the volunteer fire department desperately needs new hoses.
That perfectly connects back to that grid event conversation we were having earlier.
How so?
Well, one person turning down a thermostat does nothing. 10,000 people doing it saves the grid. And here, one person donating 50 cents does nothing. But the whole co-op doing it builds an entire community.
That is the cooperative difference right there. It's basically systems thinking applied to local charity.
I love that. Let's stay in the community for a minute. The magazine actually takes us on a bit of a road trip to Jefferson County.
Yeah.
And I have to say, the writer did a fantastic job selling the place.
It really paints a vivid picture. You've got Madison with that stunning 19th century architecture sitting right on the Ohio River.
They mentioned Clifty Falls State Park, too. Yeah. Waterfalls, rugged trails. It sounds totally idyllic.
But what I really liked is that they didn't just paint it as a museum or a tourist trap. They emphasized the grit of the area.
The grit.
Yeah, it's a working county. There's real manufacturing. There's industry. It's a place where people actually make things with their hands.
And apparently, after they spend all day making things, they go eat at Harry's Stone Grill.
The local flavor spotlight, I loved the description of this place.
The text described it as having a lodge-like atmosphere with mounted wildlife displays.
Which is pretty much local code for the food is incredibly hearty and you definitely don't need to wear a tie.
Exactly. It's not a white tablecloth kind of joint. It's steaks, huge burgers, and just hanging out with your neighbors after a Friday night ball game.
Sociologists actually call these places third places. You have your home, you have your workplace, and you need a third place to just exist as a member of your community.
And Harry's seems to be that anchor for Jefferson County.
It definitely sounds like it.
I have to admit, I felt the sudden, intense craving for a burger reading that section.
It was very effective marketing on their part.
Okay, before we wrap up today, we have to look at the news you can use section. It's March, or at least the issue we're looking at is for March, so everyone is starting to think about spring.
And the co-op is very much thinking about your HVAC system.
Of course they are.
But this is actually a really smart financial tip they're giving. They refer to March as the shoulder season.
Meaning you're done with the really heavy heating of winter, but that awful humidity of summer hasn't quite hit yet.
Right. So it is the absolute best time to do your maintenance.
And they are actively incentivizing it. There's a rebate mentioned up to $50 if you go ahead and get a professional tune-up scheduled now.
Because the logic is, if you wait until mid-July when it's 95 degrees out and your AC unit suddenly dies, you are going to be paying premium emergency rates.
And you'll probably be waiting in a very long line.
Exactly. So getting $50 back is nice, but the real savings is avoiding a massive emergency repair bill later. It's all about prevention.
They also included some DIY tips that I found interesting. I really didn't expect to find gardening advice in an electric co-op magazine.
Well, why not? It's rural Indiana.
Fair point. They talked specifically about crop rotation.
Right, especially for things like tomatoes and peppers. The rule is if you planted them in one specific spot last year, you cannot plant them there again this year.
Because the soil gets depleted.
The soil gets depleted of very specific nutrients those plants need, and worse, the local pests already know exactly where to find them. You have to move them around.
And they noted they need 6 to 8 hours of direct sun. I am actually writing that down because my tomatoes were completely tragic last year.
More sun, rotate the soil. That is the secret.
There was also a note about electrical safety that felt very much in the spirit of spring cleaning.
Yes, checking your cords. We always just assume our appliances are fine, but over a long winter, plastic gets brittle. Or maybe a mouse got into the garage and chewed on a wire.
And they mentioned dust, too. Dust is apparently the ultimate enemy of your electronics. They highly suggest cleaning the coils on your refrigerator and your dryer.
Because dust basically acts like a thick sweater.
Oh, it traps the heat.
Exactly. Your fridge has to work twice as hard to push that heat out and stay cold inside, which noticeably raises your electric bill and eventually burns out the motor entirely.
So vacuuming the coils takes, what, 5 minutes?
5 minutes, and it saves money and saves the appliance.
Look at that. Practical and cost-effective.
Yeah.
Oh, and finally, for the parents listening, there is something brand new launching. The Co-op Kids Club.
This is such a great initiative. March 5th is the official launch date.
And it's aimed at grades 1 through 6. They specifically mentioned there would be cookies and juice, which, let's be honest, is really the only negotiation tactic you need for a first grader.
True, but the underlying goal is to teach them how power actually travels to their house and how to be safe around it.
It's a really smart long-term play. If you get a kid interested in how the electric grid works when they're 7 years old, maybe they end up being the engineer who designs the next generation of smart meters.
Or at the very least, they learn not to climb the chain link fence around the local substation.
Which is also highly valuable.
Very much so.
So we have covered a huge amount of ground today. We've gone from a 10-bladed helicopter saw out in the woods to a fiber optic backbone to Bobby Hacker cleaning a gravestone to reminding you to vacuum your refrigerator coils.
It's quite a wide spectrum for one issue.
When you step back and look at this whole picture, this entire innovation meets tradition theme, we started with, what is the big takeaway for you?
It brings me right back to a specific line from the CEO's letter. He wrote, "Innovation isn't just a buzzword, it's a responsibility."
That's a pretty heavy word to use. Responsibility.
It is. We usually think of innovation as just cool new gadgets, right? Like shiny new toys. But for a cooperative, innovation is literally a survival mechanism.
Right.
They don't buy the helicopter saw to look cool. They buy it so the single mom living at the very end of a dirt road doesn't lose her power during a snowstorm.
And they don't lay 2,000 miles of fiber just to be trendy.
No, they do it so the local high school kid can actually do their homework online, or so an elderly resident can use telehealth.
It's technology completely in service of the community, not the other way around.
Exactly.
You know, it raises a really provocative question for me as we wrap this up. We live in this incredible age of AI and massive automation.
Yeah.
We're talking about smart homes with 20 different devices all talking to each other.
Right.
But when you look at what actually holds a place like this together, is the most critical infrastructure that it got them over? The fiber optic lines. Or is it actually the people?
That is the ultimate paradox, isn't it? You can automate the electric grid, you can build self-healing power lines, but you simply cannot automate the spirit of a guy like Bobby Hacker.
You can't write an algorithm that forces a neighbor to care about another neighbor.
Beautifully put. The tech facilitates the modern life, but the people are the life.
Well, whether you're out there planning your spring garden rotation, scheduling that HVAC tune-up to get your $50, or just keeping an eye out for a helicopter with a giant saw blade, it sounds like spring in southeastern Indiana is off to a very interesting start.
Indeed. It's definitely a time to look forward.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Go find your own bright idea for the spring, and we'll catch you next time.